You think you know betrayal? You think you know the sting of family turning on you? I thought I did too. I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the day I discovered my own parents. The two people who brought me into this world had not only stolen my generosity, but had actively worked to dismantle my future. And for whom? My sister, the golden child, the one who always got everything handed to her while I toiled and sacrificed. This isn't just a story about a house. It's a story about a family's rotten core, a slow descent into a hell of their own making, and the chilling, irreversible price they ultimately paid. You'll want to stay for this one, I promise you, because by the end, you'll be questioning everything you thought you knew about family, love, and the terrifying depths of human vindictiveness our family was. On the surface, a picture of traditional values and close-knit ties. My parents, strict but outwardly loving, had always emphasized the importance of family unity. I, Mark, was the elder son, always striving to please, always taking on responsibility. My younger sister, Sarah, was the apple of their eye, adored and catered to. A stark contrast to my own upbringing of expectation and duty. From a young age, I was conditioned to believe that my role was to support the family, to ensure their comfort and future. Sarah, on the other hand, was encouraged to pursue her dreams, no matter how whimsical or expensive. It started subtly, of course. My academic achievements were met with a nod, while Sarah's mediocre grades were celebrated as triumphs. My first real job, a grueling entry-level position that demanded long hours, was merely what was expected. Sarah's short-lived forays into various hobbies, each requiring significant financial investment from our parents, were hailed as signs of her creative genius. The underlying tension simmered beneath a veneer of normalcy. My wife, Emily, a pragmatic and kind-hearted woman, often pointed out the blatant favoritism. "They treat you like an ATM, Mark," she'd say, her voice laced with concern, and Sarah like their personal princess. I'd brush it off, clinging to the hope that my efforts would eventually be recognized, that my sacrifices would solidify my place in their hearts. Our biggest point of contention always revolved around money. While I worked tirelessly, saving every penny, my parents frequently hinted at their desire for a grander home, a testament to their success, or rather, my success. They lived in a perfectly comfortable, paid-off house, but their aspirations grew with my paychecks. Sarah, meanwhile, bounced from one expensive apartment to another, always needing a little help with rent or bills. A help that invariably came from our parents, who then, in turn, subtly pressured me for larger gifts. It was a vicious cycle, fueled by unspoken expectations and a deep-seated fear of disappointing my parents. I genuinely loved them, and the thought of them struggling, even when their struggles felt manufactured, gnawed at me. This emotional manipulation, this constant drip feed of guilt and obligation, was the foundation upon which everything else would eventually crumble. The idea of buying them a new house started as a dream, a grand gesture of love and gratitude. I had worked relentlessly for 15 years, meticulously saving every bonus, every extra dollar, denying myself and Emily many luxuries. We lived modestly, always with the future in mind, always with my parents' comfort as a guiding principle. When I finally hit the mark, enough for a substantial down payment on a beautiful, larger home in a more affluent neighborhood, I was ecstatic. I envisioned their faces, beaming with pride, finally acknowledging my years of dedication. Emily, ever supportive, cautioned me to consider the implications, to put some boundaries in place, but my heart was set. This was it, my ultimate offering. I presented the idea to them, complete with brochures and carefully calculated figures. Their initial reaction was overwhelming joy, tears, and promises of eternal gratitude. It felt like a lifetime of striving had finally paid off. We found the perfect house, a spacious colonial with a manicured garden, everything they had ever dreamed of. I handled all the paperwork, the inspections, the legalities. My name, and solely my name, was on the purchase agreement and the mortgage application. This was my gift, my sacrifice. The closing day was supposed to be a triumph. I arrived at the lawyer's office, eager to finalize everything. My parents were already there, and to my surprise, so was Sarah. I brushed it off as her wanting to share in the excitement, perhaps even feeling a pang of gratitude. The lawyer began to explain the documents, and that's when the first chill ran down my spine. He kept referring to the children as joint owners. "Excuse me?" I interjected, my voice tighter than I intended. "This house is solely in my name. I purchased it for my parents." The lawyer looked uncomfortable, shuffling his papers. My mother then, with a sweet, saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes, said, "Oh, darling, we just thought it would be lovely for Sarah to have a share too, for family unity. We're all in this together." My blood ran cold. I saw the documents, clear as day. My signature, not just on the purchase agreement, but on an entirely new deed of gift, transferring a significant portion of ownership to Sarah, and then I looked closer. It wasn't my signature. It was a clumsy, almost cartoonish forgery. A crude imitation that, in my initial excitement, I had somehow missed on the stack of papers I was presented with. My vision blurred, a roaring sound filling my ears. This isn't my signature," I stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the doctored document. My father, who had been conspicuously silent, finally spoke, his voice low and menacing. "Don't be dramatic, Mark. It's just a formality. We're a family." Sarah, meanwhile, had the audacity to grin at me, a smug, triumphant smirk that solidified the depth of their complicity. The world tilted. My parents, my own flesh and blood, had conspired with my sister to steal from me, to invalidate my sacrifice, to turn my act of love into a weapon against me. I felt a visceral, gut-wrenching pain, a betrayal so profound it hollowed me out. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I simply walked out, leaving them in the lawyer's office, the forged documents like a scarlet letter burning in my mind. The silence that followed me was deafening, but within that silence, a new voice began to emerge, cold and clear. A voice that whispered of reckoning. The days that followed were a blur of grief, rage, and a terrifying clarity. Emily was a rock, holding me as I shattered, then piecing me back together with quiet strength. Her initial shock gave way to fierce protectiveness, and together we began to formulate a plan. Not just for justice, but for something far more profound. This wasn't about the house anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, punishing their avarice, and ensuring they understood the true cost of their betrayal. The first step was legal. I consulted with a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who listened to my story with a grim expression. Forgery was a serious offense, and with the original documents and my testimony, we had a strong case. However, she warned me of the emotional toll, the inevitable public spectacle of suing my own family. I told her I didn't care. The emotional toll had already been taken, but legal retribution, while satisfying, felt incomplete. It wouldn't touch the core of their greed, their arrogance. It wouldn't make them truly feel what they had done. That's when Emily, ever the astute observer, stumbled upon something else. My parents, in their rush to secure their dream home, had been less than diligent about its history. It was an older house, beautiful but with a past. A past involving a series of strange occurrences, unexplained disappearances, and a pervasive, lingering chill that sellers often downplayed. And there was a particular room, a small, unassuming study in the back that had been sealed off for years. The previous owners, a reclusive couple, had fled abruptly after their son vanished without a trace, leaving behind an unsettling sense of dread. The lawyer's words echoed in my mind, public spectacle. What if the spectacle wasn't just in the courtroom? What if it unfolded within the very walls they had so eagerly stolen? My plan began to coalesce, a dark tapestry woven from legalities, hidden histories, and a chilling understanding of my family's weaknesses. I started by strategically leaking information, not to my family directly, but to their social circle, the very people whose opinions they so desperately courted. Anonymous tips about the disputed ownership of their new house, rumors about potential fraud, whispers about Sarah's sudden, unexplained affluence. Their carefully constructed image began to crack. The small wins came first. A prospective buyer for Sarah's old, expensive apartment suddenly backed out, citing unforeseen complications I may or may not have subtly orchestrated. My father, a man obsessed with appearances, began to notice the subtle shift in how his acquaintances treated him, the hesitant smiles, the averted gazes. The tensions within their new grand home began to fray. Sarah, now burdened with the responsibility of a mortgage she couldn't afford and the growing scrutiny of her friends, grew increasingly agitated. The house, designed to be a symbol of their triumph, slowly began to feel like a cage. And in the background, like a silent, growing hum, was the history of that house. I spent hours researching, digging into old newspaper archives, property records, local folklore. The stories were vague, hinting at darkness, at something that clung to the very foundations of the colonial abode. I learned about the strange accidents, the unexplained cold spots, the whispers of shadows moving just out of sight. I started collecting these stories, not just from my own morbid curiosity, but as pieces of a larger puzzle. A puzzle that, once complete, would not only expose their greed, but would unravel their peace of mind, piece by agonizing piece. The revenge was no longer just about the house. It was about the haunting. The final act of my revenge unfolded with a chilling precision that still sends shivers down my spine. The legal battle was already underway, a slow, grinding process that was bleeding my parents and Sarah dry, both financially and emotionally. The news of the forgery had spread through their social circles like wildfire, tarnishing their carefully cultivated reputations. My mother, once the queen of her social gatherings, now found herself ostracized, her calls going unanswered. My father, his pride wounded, became increasingly volatile, his temper flaring at the slightest provocation. Sarah, overwhelmed by the legal fees and the public humiliation, was a shell of her former self, the golden child now tarnished and afraid. But the house held the true climax. I had meticulously gathered every whispered rumor, every newspaper clipping about its dark past. I compiled them into an anonymous dossier, subtly enhanced with a touch of narrative flair, making the unexplained phenomena sound far more sinister. This dossier, along with carefully selected images of the sealed-off study and its boarded-up windows, found its way into the hands of local paranormal investigators, a team known for their dramatic public investigations. I made sure to anonymously tip them off about the house's new owners, my parents. The promise of a high-profile investigation, especially with a backstory involving a family dispute and mysterious disappearances, was too enticing for them to resist. The night of the investigation was a spectacle. News vans parked down the street, neighbors gathered, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and thinly veiled schadenfreude. My parents, trapped in their grand stolen home, watched in horror as the investigators, armed with their EMF meters and thermal cameras, descended upon their property. I watched from a distance, a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. The team, guided by my tips, made a beeline for the sealed study. With dramatic flair, they tore down the boarded-up wall, revealing a small, claustrophobic room, its air heavy and stagnant. As their cameras rolled, capturing every tremor of the EMF meter, every drop in temperature, the lead investigator recounted the house's grim history, detailing the vanished boy, the subsequent owners driven to madness. The pervasive sense of dread. Then, one of the investigators let out a gasp. A small, antique wooden music box sat on a dusty shelf, long forgotten. As she picked it up, a faint, melancholic tune began to play, seemingly of its own accord. A cold gust of wind swept through the room, though all windows were closed. My mother screamed, a raw, primal sound of terror. My father, his face ashen, tried to usher Sarah away, but she was frozen, her eyes wide with fear, staring at the shadows that seemed to dance in the corners of the small room. The broadcast, live-streamed and sensationalized, became a local phenomenon. The haunted house purchased through fraud and betrayal. The imagery of their terrified faces, the chilling music box, the palpable fear in the air, it was devastating. They were not just humiliated. They were truly, deeply terrified in the very home they had stolen. The house, their symbol of status, became their prison, a monument to their darkest deeds, forever tainted by its history and their own avarice. The legal proceedings were now merely a formality, a slow bleed after the fatal wound. The aftermath was exactly as I'd envisioned, yet far more unsettling than I could have prepared for. My parents lost the legal battle, of course. The forged documents, coupled with my meticulously kept records, were undeniable. They were forced to sell the house, a house now infamous, its value plummeting due to the paranormal activity and the scandal surrounding its acquisition. The proceeds barely covered their legal fees, leaving them financially ruined and utterly disgraced. They moved into a cramped, rented apartment, a stark contrast to the grand life they had craved. Sarah, whose name was inextricably linked to the forgery and the public humiliation, found herself professionally isolated and personally adrift. The golden child had tarnished, her dreams shattered by her own complicity. I never spoke to them again, nor did Emily. The silence was absolute, a void where family once was. Sometimes, late at night, a fragment of their terrified faces from that broadcast would flash in my mind. My mother's scream, my father's hollow eyes, Sarah's petrified stare. Was it justice? Yes. Was it satisfying? In a dark, profound way, it was. But it also left a lingering chill, a haunting question mark in the quiet corners of my own heart. Because while they paid the price, the cost of betrayal leaves its mark on everyone involved. You see, the funny thing about revenge is that it doesn't always taste as sweet as you imagine. Sometimes it leaves an aftertaste of ashes, a lingering sense of unease. What truly haunts them now, the shame, the financial ruin, or the whispers of that spectral music box still echoing in the empty rooms of their stolen dreams. Perhaps in the end, it's all the same. What would you have done in this situation?